What is behind Germany's China strategy? Does it reflect or depict the Zeitenwende, a historical shift that Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz has quite often been talking about? Today, I'll discuss the making of Germany's China strategy, which is less a historical shift and more a coalition balancing with shadows of ambiguity, but definitely with elements of estrangement between Germany and China. So Germany's unveiling of a 64-page strategy document on China was dampened by a lack of concrete measures to de-risk from it. It kind of takes one back to classic paradoxes that have gripped the German state in the actualization of its current being. What is the value of this symbolic document for Germany, if any? What does it contribute to European de-risking discourse on China? And what direction does it give to Europe's overarching concerns of having a resilient economy in the post-Ukraine world? First things first, at its heart, it's more about Olaf Scholz's promise to deliver on forming a coalition consensus on China than to convert it into a genuine economic policy performative. With this vantage point, it disappoints less. This rather interesting document is also a harbinger of the end of the golden era of Germany-China relations. Let's first understand the German coalition potpourri, where center-left Social Democrats, the SPD, business-focused Free Democrats, or the FDP, and environmentalists, the Greens, have agreed to form a coalition government that is headed by Olaf Scholz from the SDP. To begin with, the fact that a chancellor from the Social Democrats could put business considerations on a second priority was itself a surprise to many. The optimists saw it as a balancing act and reconciling the pro-China business lobbies with a China-skeptic economic affairs ministry. But the pessimists, on the other hand, sighed at the ambiguity of a document that identifies the problem areas but offers hardly any mechanisms to redeem them. See, the point is, while analysis cannot reduce the enmeshed uncertainty around this global dynamic, it can reduce the complexity of seemingly flabbergasting events and decisions that follow. So how far this is a coalition antic? The ruling coalition in Berlin, as I told you, is an unusual mix of China optics like the Social Democrats and Free Democrats and China skeptics like the Greens. The latter, for most of their young political career, have been in the opposition. So they look at German politics and foreign policy with an idealistic lens, whether it's on China or on the nuclear energy debate. But the Social Democrats, the SPDs, where the Chancellor is from, have been on the other side of the table. They take pride as a stabilizing force in Germany, and for good reason. So it was SPD that formed the remarkable but tragic Weimar Republic in the interwar years, that is between the First and the Second World Wars. It was an SPD leader, Friedrich Ebert, who became the first German elected president before the Nazis made ascent to German political landscape, capitalizing on the Great Depression. I'm sure you all have heard about it, and eventually choking off all democratic spaces, sealing Germany's fate to doom of what followed, and we all know what followed. The point to reckon here is that SPD's long participation in the making of the modern German state has given it a characteristic pragmatism to fine-tune to moderate realities despite a long ideological journey through a century and a half, settling within the center-left of the German ideological spectrum. So it's the Social Democrats, then in opposition, who had carefully witnessed the German economic miracle, referred to as Wirtschaftswunder in German. This combination of free market with a strong welfare state, encapsulated by the concept of socialist market economy, was developed by Walter Eucken. It was his protege, Ludwig Erhard, who later became the Federal Minister of Economic Affairs and also the father of this German miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. The lesson in pragmatism, aided by the Marshall Plan, was undeniably the writing on the wall. It has remained with the SPD ever since. Cut to December 2021. Promise of a new China strategy was indeed a part of the coalition agreement when it came to power exactly 2 months before the war in Ukraine began. What was meant as catering to an in-house division on perceptions and approaches on China got a completely different spin as Russia locked horns with the West over a strategic blunder in Ukraine, complicating Germany's and the rest of Europe's strategic calculus. So Germany, along with the EU, embarked on a next to impossible feat of diversifying from the most fundamental driver of German economic planning, which is, of course, Russian energy, and which they have done quite aggressively. But this came at the cost of perpetrating harsh industrial pain on itself that made China all the more indispensable as an economic partner. The variables in the European geo-economic matrix, so to say, however, also got more complicated with China's indirect but steady support to Russia and its palpable preparedness for a war in the Straits, and here I'm referring to Taiwan. The continent today seems caught in the web of its normative order and perception of its identity on the one hand versus its survival interests on the other. The Greens, still gripped in opposition idealism, have been pushing for a tougher stance on China. This alone explains the statements made by Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, who belongs to the Greens, while the Chancellor, a Social Democrat, operates in pragmatism, keeping economy first when dealing with the authoritarian regimes such as China. So SPD's proclivity towards risk aversion in a very uncertain world is enthusiastically lapped on by the industrialist lobbies such as the heads of Volkswagen and the chemical giant BASF, whose engagement with China has actually radically deepened after the war in Ukraine. Now, let me tell you about the different drafts of the China strategy that have been discussed over the course of the Ukraine war and its impact on German economy. What the world saw revealed last month as the first ever strategy on China was not how the strategy was envisioned in the first place. When the first draft was accessed by the press in November 2022, some say it was leaked. Anyway, it had stunned many by its sheer hawkish overtones on China. More than 24 mentions of NATO and an unusual number of mentions of India as well. However, the version that was released by the government on 13th July 2023 was significantly watered down, far more diplomatic, and had far lesser teeth to make any genuine impact on the ground. The most baffling edit was an abject removal of all such instruments that could ensure economic security with respect to China that would have truly made Germany's economy more resilient in the longer run. But no matter how watered down, the Chinese embassy in Germany was the first Chinese state agency that issued a 4-point rebuttal to Germany's first ever strategy on China. The rebuttal expectedly played up the cost of de-risking from China that, from Beijing's perspective, of course, would like to be seen more as a partner than a rival. The German business lobby and the CEOs too heaved a sigh of relief welcoming the toned-down document. It did not mention, for instance, any binding measures such as cutting down targets for German industries that are functioning in China, because these industries have already been impacted very badly by the industrial pain incurred since the war in Ukraine began. But all said and done, no one can deny the fundamental reset in Germany's and Europe's perceptions of China that will play out in times to come. And that explains the two countries' journey onto estrangement. The world in 2023 seems oblivious of China-Germany shared economic growth that gave the post-Cold War trade globalization its characteristic hue. As China opened up and Kissinger made history with US's reorientation towards Beijing, Germany also joined this enthusiasm of change through trade approach. But it wasn't long before the fundamentally incorrect assumptions in the rather naive liberal aspiration of changing China politically through making it more integrated into world economy started to show. Before China's astounding pace of development led to a tangibly more confrontational order with the West in the Indo-Pacific, the flavor of Sino-German economic relationship had begun to change, especially after Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. Not many would know, for instance, that despite being a part of the ADB, Germany has steered clear of China's BRI initiatives. A structural framework to Germany's economic security in the Indo-Pacific and upholding a rules-based order in the region got further adumbrated with Berlin's Indo-Pacific strategy of 2021. Russia's war in Ukraine made the Europeans concert efforts to link economics with strategic considerations in the Indo-Pacific. Germany and other European powers have been looking afresh at the region with a commitment to empower their friends and allies like, for instance, India and Indonesia, mindful of the fact that they have a disdain to pick sides between the unfolding power rivalry in the Indo-Pacific. But again, it has been easier said than done. In the years that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall, the late 80s, Beijing has also learned the art of driving wedges between the transatlantic allies by the sheer weight of economic dependence that the Europeans, and in particular Germany, started to have on China. In the larger tussle between geopolitics and geoeconomics, Germany's China strategy is a necessary but not a sufficient condition to de-risk from China in line with the broader European approach to economic security. Where it makes an indelible contribution is no matter how ambiguous on backing it with action, it does mark a rather irreversible shift in European and German relations with China. As global trade leaves the smug neoliberal haven and as economic resilience hinges more on friendshoring and trusted connections, Germany has made a choice. Things from here will only get more pronounced. But when is a matter of speculation, depending on the turn of global events like CCP's continued support to Russia's war in Ukraine and its eventual decision on Taiwan that will determine exactly how catastrophic the disruption of global supply chains gets. From New Delhi's perspective, these developments and discussions acquaint the world and India with the ensuing debate on how to manage China. What makes it even more interesting is the tilt of German public opinion towards New Delhi while it is moving away from Beijing. So while a genuine German Zeitenwende does not seem to be on the cards with respect to China, it does open a wide array of fruitful discussion on how to manage economic dependence on it. The link to my article is given in the description box. Please look it up for further references. I'll be back to discuss more on the enmeshed geopolitical uncertainty and reduce some complexity around it. Stay tuned.